In the last episode, we discussed the underlying logic behind the Russia-Ukraine war, including why it started right after the Winter Olympics, and explained the whole story clearly. That story is true. Some people then privately messaged me, asking what ultimately happened to Beseda and Polyuk. Why didn't I explain their fate? I thought I didn't need to explain it again. With Russia's temper, those two guys would have been punished severely. If you check the news from May 2022, you'll see that Russia announced a purge of its intelligence services. That was about this very situation. President Putin was furious. Actually, the Russia-Ukraine war played right into the hands of the US, who was eager for Putin to take action. Why? Well, the US is essentially a corporation disguised as a country. Its sole purpose is to serve capital. How does it serve capital? By making money for it, of course. If the US can't generate profits and its company performance stagnates, the major shareholders behind it will withdraw their investments. Once they do, the company goes bankrupt. That's the basic idea. Unlike us, who talk about hard work and national rejuvenation, the US doesn't care about that. I explained this clearly in previous episodes. By early 2022, the US national debt had reached $30 trillion, an impossible amount to repay. To stay afloat, they had to resort to robbery, but who could they rob? As I mentioned in the last episode, Europe was the target. China was too tough, so they couldn't easily rob us. Instead, the US used the Russia-Ukraine war to plunder Europe. This is where economics comes into play. Some people don't understand how starting a war between Russia and Ukraine could allow the US to rob Europe. Let me simplify it. Whenever war breaks out, it's the wealthy who flee first, not necessarily the politicians. Why? Politicians' power is tied to the government. If the war destroys the government, they lose everything. But the wealthy don't care. They can easily transfer their assets abroad because financial systems are interconnected worldwide. When European capitalists saw the Russia-Ukraine war break out, they worried that their assets were no longer safe. What if Russia fired a nuclear missile in their direction? Their mansions and properties would be destroyed. So, they sold their assets at low prices, converted them to cash, and, noticing the US dollar was appreciating, they converted everything into US dollars. The dollar's value was rising, so by holding dollars, their wealth increased too. Thus, European wealth flowed into American pockets. Once their money was in the US, these capitalists thought, why not go there too? So they bought plane tickets and fled. When the Russia-Ukraine war started, many wealthy Ukrainians fled, and the same happened in Europe. The US was delighted. They didn't even have to lift a finger to have all this money flow into their coffers. This is one reason the US remains a global superpower. They have the means to pull off these strategies. By early March 2022, the US was greedily absorbing Europe's fleeing capital, which gave its domestic economy a boost. But then the US noticed something strange. Not all of Europe's fleeing capital was going into American pockets. A significant portion was ending up in China. What was happening? Well, China has a complete industrial supply chain, so while financial capital fled to the US, much of Europe's industrial capital moved to China. Some might ask, what's the difference between financial capital and industrial capital? Here's a simple explanation. Financial capital refers to things like stocks and funds, investments that don't engage in production, but just make money with money. Industrial capital, on the other hand, involves investing money to build factories, start companies, and engage in manufacturing. It's more tangible. In terms of quality, industrial capital is much more solid. Financial capital doesn't produce real value and can flee at a moment's notice. The US was enraged. After all the effort to destabilize Europe, much of the industrial capital was moving to China, and the US was left feeling like they were doing all the hard work while China reaped the benefits. The US was already furious about losing face at the Winter Olympics, and now they were even more determined to disrupt China. They developed a grand plan to ensure all the world's capital would flow to the US, ideally creating chaos across the Eurasian continent while the US remained the only stable region, just like after World War II, when all the world's capital and talent moved to the US, cementing their position as the global leader. So how did the US start playing its cards? Ingeniously. As the global superpower, the US is skilled at orchestrating strategies. In March 2022, right after the Beijing Winter Olympics, the USS Carl Vinson had just retrieved the plane that had fallen into the sea. There was only a blurry photo of a large object wrapped in canvas, with no visible tail. So it remains uncertain if they retrieved the plane, but it didn't matter, they had bigger issues to deal with. The Carl Vinson returned to the US for repairs, as both the deck and arresting wires were damaged. By March 2022, only one U.S. carrier remained in the Western Pacific, the Abraham Lincoln. However, the Lincoln received new orders to sail to the Philippines for a port visit. Why? The U.S. knew that the Philippines was about to hold elections and wanted to interfere, ensuring that an anti-China president was elected. This would place a nail in the South China Sea. Over the past few years, incidents like the Sierra Madre grounding and the disputes over Scarborough Shoal were all part of this U.S. strategy. In April 2022, the Philippines held its elections, and the U.S. installed Marcos Jr. as president. Marcos is much like Zelensky, serving as an American proxy. Marcos Jr.'s background tells the story. His father was once president of the Philippines, but was overthrown due to corruption and fled to the U.S. with his family. Marcos Jr. studied in the U.S. and reportedly even held U.S. citizenship, which he renounced only after being sent back to the Philippines to enter politics. While he may have regained Philippine citizenship, his heart and loyalty likely remained with the U.S., where his wife, children, and wealth reside. This reveals the true purpose behind the U.S.'s global promotion of its political system. It's not about ideology or values like democracy, freedom, or human rights. That's all nonsense. The U.S. political system is designed with a backdoor that allows major powers to control smaller countries. By manipulating public opinion, controlling the elite, and influencing regional representatives, they can essentially elect anyone, even a dog, if needed. This system explains why Marcos Jr., installed by the U.S., would naturally repay them by supporting their agenda. The ongoing disputes in the South China Sea, such as the Sierra Madre incident, are a direct result of U.S. interference. This was the first nail the U.S. hammered down in March 2022. With Marcos Jr. in place, the Lincoln carrier didn't stop there. It sailed north, aiming for the Yellow Sea. He didn't actually want to provoke us because he knew the Panda was too formidable. It wouldn't be easy to gain an advantage by taking action lightly. So why did he go to the Yellow Sea? You need to understand the international context at the time. From late February to March 5, 2022, North Korea's 80s generation tested an intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-17. This Hwasong-17 is very powerful, with a range of up to 15,000 kilometers, capable of hitting the U.S. mainland directly. It also uses multiple warhead technology, meaning one missile can carry 3 nuclear warheads. In other words, if they launch one Hwasong-17 missile at the U.S., it would result in the destruction of 3 U.S. cities. Imagine how anxious the Americans must have been. Their biggest fear is a threat to their homeland. Therefore, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group hastened to the vicinity of North Korea, which is near the Yellow Sea, but that was one objective. The other objective was to rendezvous with the USS most advanced electronic reconnaissance ship, the Howard O. Lawrenson. Why was the Howard O. Lawrenson also there? Actually, a month earlier, the U.S. had already obtained reliable intelligence through the C4ISR network, indicating that North Korea might soon test a ballistic missile that could potentially reach the U.S. mainland. In the face of C4ISR intelligence, North Korea had no secrets. So the U.S. sent the Howard O. Lawrenson to monitor North Korea's missile launch process and collect data on the missile. Before we continue, let's first introduce the basic capabilities of the Howard O. Lawrenson. This ship can be considered the most powerful electronic reconnaissance vessel on the planet. The U.S. sent the Lawrenson to also suppress our Type 815 electronic reconnaissance ship, as they needed to avenge the setback at the Winter Olympics. The Howard O. Lawrenson is a new vessel, launched in 2010 and officially commissioned in 2014. It has a full load displacement of 13,696 tons, a length of 163 meters, a width of 27 meters, a top speed of 20 knots, and a range of 12,000 nautical miles, allowing it to operate independently for 70 days without resupply. Just by its size, it is twice as large as our Type 815 electronic reconnaissance ship. What does this large size benefit? It allows the ship to carry a large radar system, essentially moving a land-based phased array radar onto the ship. If you get a chance, you can check out its photos. The ship looks like a cargo vessel, with the superstructure covered in radars except for the smokestack. It is equipped with a Judy Cobra 2 improved dual-band phased array radar, capable of searching targets in the XS band. XS band is a bit complex. You can understand it as being able to scan both aerial and sea targets. This dual-band capability means the ship's radar system is highly advanced. The ship's radar antennas alone weigh over 600 tons. This phased array radar means the ship also has electronic jamming capabilities. Phased array radars can emit high-speed electromagnetic beams in a specific direction to burn out the electronic components on the opponent's equipment. This is a particularly aggressive tactic. The US sent the Lorenzen to take revenge for the Winter Olympics. They were confident in their electronic warfare capabilities. Now, let's put the Lorenzen aside and continue discussing the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. Its northern deployment had not only the purpose of deterring North Korea but also another objective. South Korea was about to hold elections, and the US wanted to place another nail near Panda's doorstep. This nail was the election of Yoon Suk-yeol in May 2022. Look how impressive the US is. Not only that, but in July 2022, they also took out Kim Jong-un, leaving Kishida only able to follow American commands. See how powerful the US is. This series of actions set up a formidable strategy at Panda's doorstep. To be honest, we should not underestimate the US. They are also strategic experts. Okay, let's not digress. Let's go back to late March and early April 2022. The US Carrier Strike Group, the Lincoln, arrived near Panda's Yellow Sea. As soon as it reached the Yellow Sea, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group was excited. Why? Because it finally met up with the Lorenzen. Once the Lorenzen joined the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, the Americans quickly grew bold. They thought, come on, Type 815, if you dare to come, we'll destroy you. So, in early April, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group advanced towards our Yangtze River estuary, only 200 kilometers from Shanghai. Consider that the Carrier Strike Group's operational radius can reach nearly 1,000 kilometers. And with Shanghai only 200 kilometers away, it means that at that moment, Shanghai was entirely within their strike range, including Jiangsu, Zhejiang, and Anhui provinces. Imagine how unbearable that was for us. The Type 815 electronic reconnaissance ship immediately set out, and just like before, it quickly approached. The USS Lorenzen saw, hey, the main target is here. So, it fully activated its electronic jamming, directing high-speed electromagnetic beams at our Type 815 electronic reconnaissance ship. Our Type 815 electronic reconnaissance ship was immediately shut down. The Lorenzen was quite surprised. Wasn't it said that the Panda's electronic ship was particularly formidable, with its own phased array radar? Why did it fail so easily? The radar immediately burned out. The Lorenzen's confidence surged, and it no longer tried to hide. The Judy Cobra phased array radar was running at full power for wide area scanning and electromagnetic suppression. The radar's search range was said to reach 4,600 kilometers. As soon as it was activated, it had a clear view of half of Panda's territory. But the more they looked, the more shocked they were. They noticed two H-6K bombers rapidly approaching from the Shandong area, and from the southeast, there were many small objects quickly approaching the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. What these were was unclear, but they seemed very small but numerous. The commanding officer of the Lincoln, Colonel Amy Bowers-Smith, immediately issued orders for the carrier-based aircraft to take off and investigate what these objects were. By the way, Colonel Amy Bowers-Smith is a woman, the top commander on the Lincoln, managing 6,000 male crew members. She is quite exceptional, decisive in her actions. She also issued the order to shoot down any aircraft posing a threat to the Carrier Strike Group without hesitation. During wartime, the worst thing is a hesitant commander who is afraid to fire. A military leader must be fearless, leaving the cleanup to the civilian officials. As a result, after the carrier-based aircraft took off, they split into two groups. One group went north to intercept our H-6K bombers, while the other group went south to intercept the small flying objects. We were discussing the H-6K bomber direction. From the deck of the aircraft carrier, For FA-180 Super Hornet fighters, anti-A-180 electronic reconnaissance aircraft quickly took off to intercept our H-6K bombers from the north. These planes are fast, just one throttle, and they were face to face. Even though the FA-180 is the main fighter jet on the Lincoln aircraft carrier, its current mission is mainly to protect the two A-180 electronic reconnaissance planes. Why? Because, after all, the US hasn't declared war on China yet. They're not crazy enough to fire missiles and provoke a nuclear war right away. So, during peacetime interception missions, the primary role is fulfilled by the electronic reconnaissance aircraft. Speaking of which, we need to highlight the capabilities of the U.S. A-180 electronic reconnaissance aircraft. The A-180 is nicknamed the Growler, and just from the name, you can tell what it does: wide area electromagnetic radiation emission. It's loud, hence the name Growler. It was developed to replace the older A-6B Prowler model. The A-180 Growler is arguably the most famous electronic warfare aircraft on the planet. Its primary missions are electronic attacks and suppression of enemy air defenses. Not only can it suppress enemy electronic systems, but it can also fire anti-radiation missiles to destroy them. In other words, this aircraft can perform reconnaissance, electronic suppression, and even missile strikes to destroy enemy targets. Although the A-180 was modified from the FA-18 Super Hornet by adding electronic systems and electronic pods, its single-unit cost exceeds that of the F-22 back in the day because it's packed with expensive equipment. For example, it uses the ALQ-99 radar jamming pod and the ALQ-227 communications countermeasure system from Raytheon. It also has the ALQ-99 jammer from Grumman, which provides 360-degree jamming coverage. Not only can it jam targets across a wide area, but it can also locate the jammed targets while jamming them. The most impressive feature is its ability to emit directional electromagnetic pulses, much like an active phased array radar, to jam a specific direction. It's said that it can emit electromagnetic waves within a 10-kilometer range and direct them toward a target, heating up the target's aircraft and potentially burning the pilot in the cockpit. This gives you an idea of the kind of power it's working with. Here, we need to introduce some basic knowledge. The power of the electromagnetic waves emitted by an electronic warfare aircraft ultimately depends on what? According to the law of conservation of energy, it cannot exceed the power generated by the aircraft's engines. That's basic physics. The Growler FA-180 is powered by two F-414G4O afterburning turbofan engines from General Electric. Each engine can produce a thrust of 9,980 kilograms, or roughly 10 tons. These engines have a design lifespan of 2,000 hours and 5,700 ignitions, making them top of the line in terms of performance. Thanks to these two powerful engines, the A-180 can continuously emit powerful electromagnetic waves. So, the energy of the aircraft comes directly from its engines, and the engine's capability directly determines the level of its weaponry and equipment. Now let's get back to the action. The two A-180 electronic reconnaissance planes were getting closer to the H-6K, activating their search radars to scan the H-6K, which showed up clearly on the screens. After all, the H-6K isn't a stealth aircraft. But it's not just the H-6K, there are also two J-16s following behind. And these two J-16s don't look the same. What are they carrying under their wings? They don't look like missiles, they look more like electronic pods. Suddenly, the A-180 realized, oh no, we've met a match. Could these be China's J-16s? They'd heard about them but had never seen them in action until now. Time to take a closer look. However, the A-180 also noticed something more concerning. The two H-6Ks were carrying YJ-12 anti-ship missiles. This meant that the A-180 had very limited time for interception. If the H-6Ks broke through their interception range, the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier could be in danger. Now, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has several Arleigh Burke-class destroyers with top-tier air defense capabilities, but even they would struggle against the YJ-12. Why? Because the YJ-12 is a freak of nature. It weighs 2 tons and is said to have dual for performance. What does dual for mean? It has a range of over 400 kilometers and a speed of over Mach 4 times the speed of sound. The H-6K is carrying the air-launched version of the YJ-12, the YJ-12K. Since it's air-launched, It doesn't need to use fuel for initial acceleration, so its range can reach 600 kilometers. For anyone familiar with anti-ship missiles, hearing these specs might seem unbelievable. The basic principle of physics is that the faster something goes, the more fuel it consumes. So, typically, anti-ship missiles that are fast have a shorter range, and those with a longer range tend to be slower. But this missile achieves both high speed and long range. How is that possible? Did it defy the laws of physics? No, it's just highly innovative. Despite being large and heavy, weighing over 2 tons, it's quite agile and capable of sea-skimming flight. When it flies at sea level, it moves slowly at subsonic speeds, gradually approaching the target. Sea-skimming missiles are notoriously difficult for enemy radars to detect. By the time you spot it, it's practically on top of you. At this point, your only option is to use your fire control radar to lock onto it and fire short-range air defense missiles to intercept it. But here's the tricky part: once this missile is locked on by fire control radar, it knows. That's when it stops pretending and reveals its true nature, accelerating to over Mach 4, even up to Mach 5, and begins a serpentine maneuver, changing its flight path toward its target. At Mach 4 or 5, the missile is faster than most short-range air defense missiles, which typically fly at around Mach 3, so intercepting it becomes nearly impossible. But that's not the scariest part. The missile's evasive maneuvers are highly erratic, making it hard for point defense systems like the Phalanx to track it. And that's still not the worst of it. The most terrifying part is that once the missile gets close enough, it dives into the water, using a tactic called terminal water entry. This allows it to strike below the ship's waterline. During World War II, an aircraft carrier could take up to 3,000 hits without sinking, but a single torpedo could cause it to list and lose combat capability. So, this missile's ability to strike below the waterline is unique in the world. When the A-180 pilot saw that our two H-6Ks were carrying these missiles, his blood ran cold. He quickly reported this to his commander through the C4ISR network system. The C4ISR system immediately issued an optimal command for the USS Abraham Lincoln to turn around and retreat, with all its escort ships, missile destroyers, and Aegis cruisers powering up to cover the retreat. The carrier fled, so the A-180s and Super Hornets also had to turn around and run. If they didn't, where would they land? They certainly couldn't land at Shanghai's Hongqiao Airport. Although the USS Abraham Lincoln retreated, it wasn't a full retreat because it headed in the wrong direction towards the eastern waters of Taiwan. But why is it said to be incorrect? Because around April 14th, 6 American congressmen visited Taiwan. Among them was a woman in a white dress. If you're going, just go openly. Why sneak in at night? Isn't that suspicious? So, the movement of the USS Lincoln was clearly meant to show support for Taiwan. We couldn't just tolerate such behavior. The main force of the North Sea Fleet's destroyers quickly assembled, including the Nanchang 101, Lhasa 102, Anshan 103, and Wuxi 104, all O-55 destroyers. This was the first large-scale assembly of O-55 destroyers since their inception. Seeing this, the USS Lincoln seemed to realize it had made a mistake. So, the 6 congressmen on Taiwan Island decided to leave. Where did they go? They crossed the Bashi Channel and headed east. Meanwhile, our Liaoning Carrier Strike Group sailed south into the Philippine Sea for exercises. Why was the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group conducting exercises in the Philippine Sea at this time? Given that the Americans had sent 6 congressmen to visit Taiwan, we needed to make a statement. The best way to do this was to conduct exercises east of Taiwan. Why? Because if we exercised east of Taiwan, those 6 congressmen wouldn't be able to return. They had come on a commercial flight, and they would need to leave the same way. If we conducted exercises east of Taiwan, the air routes would be closed, making it difficult for them to return. This was meant as a lesson to show those 6 congressmen that Taiwan is our home. If you come, you come. If you want to leave, it depends on our mood. So, when the news of the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group's exercises in eastern Taiwan in May was announced, the 6 congressmen on Taiwan Island were terrified and fled on April 15th. Look at these clowns. They arrived on Taiwan on the night of April 14th and left the next morning. It seems they just stopped by for a quick bath at a hotel and left the next day. Isn't that incredibly foolish? Even though these 6 clowns fled, we still have to keep our promises. There would definitely be military exercises in eastern Taiwan in early May. Therefore, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group didn't go far. Why? Because we chose to conduct the exercises in the Philippine Sea, which is the second island chain. If the Americans allowed us to tear apart the second island chain, Asia would be ours. So, they absolutely wouldn't allow this to happen. The Lincoln Carrier Strike Group therefore stayed close, waiting for us in the Philippine Sea after passing through the Bashi Channel. This time, they were more confident because this area was far from Panda Land. The second island chain means that Panda's land-based resources are much smaller. Even if you bring H-6 bombers or use YJ-12 missiles to intimidate me, you'll need tankers, which gives me enough reaction time. Besides, I have the Lawrence in conducting electronic warfare, so I'm not afraid of you. Additionally, the Reagan Carrier Strike Group is stationed in Hokkaido, having been under maintenance for 7 months. If the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group dares to come, the Reagan Carrier Strike Group will attack from the north while I attack from the south, encircling you. With your old Liaoning Carrier Strike Group, we'll squeeze the last drop out of you. If the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group is near the land, I'll still give you some leeway, considering you might land on land. But in the Philippine Sea, if your aircraft are interfered with, they'll end up in the sea. The USS Lincoln's commanding officer, Smith, was very confident. However, his first officer reminded him that Panda's 815 electronic reconnaissance ship was still following them. Smith was startled. Wasn't that ship's radar off? Why was it still following them? The first officer said it was unknown. Since its radar went off, it had been quiet but kept following them like a sticky plaster. It was a solitary ship. Smith, feeling annoyed, said, "This broken ship, being suppressed by my Lawrenson, why is it still following us? Just ignore it. If it wants to follow, let it follow. It has no supply ship and no attack capability. When we enter the Philippine Sea, there are no refueling stations there." The timeline is May 1, 2022. Our Liaoning Carrier Strike Group is heading toward eastern Taiwan. Will the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group encounter a two-front attack? We'll discuss that next time.